Hello, I am Jake Collins, and this is my commentary for the Masters of the Universe 1987 movie. I've always liked this intro with the matte painting of Castle Grayskull and the sorceress shown in such a small perspective standing in its eye, and the narration setting us up for the feel and premise of the movie. And I did always like the way that the narration manages to lead into the title, Masters of the Universe, which the original cartoon series, of course, never really found a way to use properly. Was Masters of the Universe supposed to refer to the goodies, the baddies, neither of them, both of them? The 1983 cartoon series was never sure and never found a way to incorporate the phrase effectively, but this movie does. I always noticed, of course, that the opening music was very much a rip-off of the Superman theme tune, and it is a rip-off of the Superman theme tune with not that much done to it, but the cosmic key melody inserted judiciously at times, which is a bit different. But of course, you can read and hear in various places online about how this movie and Superman 4 were made with money that was all supposed to go on Superman 4, and Mattel let this movie down by not giving it as much money as it had promised, and kind of backing out of wanting to really be involved with it very much, because of course the Masters of the Universe toy line was in the decline by this point. The cartoon wasn't really around anymore, and this movie was unfortunate because it didn't receive all the time and money and effort that it really deserved, and a lot of people see it as, bad movie, terrible movie, disgrace to He-Man and the Masters of the Universe franchise as a result. But the people who were there busy working on it, the actors, the crew, director Gary Goddard, who does a commentary on the DVD, I think put a lot into this, a lot of time, a lot of effort, that they weren't being paid as much as they had hoped for. And they used limited sets and limited locations and limited time rather effectively, really. When I first watched this, I wasn't expecting anything more from a live-action version of He-Man. Obviously, it was going to be very different from the cartoon. You couldn't translate it into live-action exactly as we saw it on screen in the cartoon series, and this was a fair and adequate way of doing it for me when I first saw this, and it still is. I first watched this when it premiered on BBC One in the run-up to Christmas 1990, which is when it was, 3 years old? That was the first time it was put on the telly in Britain, and we were out at the time, and it was set and recorded on video, and we kept the video, and I used to watch the movie about once a year until I got the DVD about 18 years later, and I've continued to watch it regularly since then, so I've obviously always enjoyed it, and I am extremely fond of it, and always will be. I don't say it's a brilliant movie or anything, but I think it's very good for what it is, and certainly an enjoyable movie, and there's plenty in there for He-Man fans, and if you appreciate a lot of the hard work that the actors, producers, everyone, directors putting into it, rather than concentrating on, no, it's cheap, it's rubbish, it's not what it could be, then I think there's a lot of enjoyment to be had from it. One criticism I've come across is that, there's not enough Eternia, And we've seen all we're going to see of Eternia now. This kind of sandy, rocky, deserty landscape from a couple of different angles with the painting of Grayskull in the background. And, of course, the big Eternia set, the huge double soundstage Castle Grayskull interior, which they make extensive use of. And people say, oh, it's not enough Eternia, we don't see Snake Mountain, too much Earth, it's cheap and nasty and generic, just mucking about with teenagers on Earth. But I actually thought when I first watched this, that was quite original, really. I didn't realise it was mainly a budgetary concern that had made them show so little Eternia and so much contemporary Earth. But yeah, on the cartoon, we'd already seen loads of Eternia, more Eternia than can possibly fit on the map of Eternia. And it made sense to me. Oh, right, we're doing some stuff on Earth, relating the movie to us, our time, our place, if we're in North America, which the main original audience would have been. It didn't occur to me, oh, well, they haven't been able to make Eternia because they haven't got enough money. I thought it was entirely deliberate, and the tantalising glimpses we get of Eternia were more than enough for me. And, it makes plot sense, all this being set in and around Castle Grayskull. That was always fine with me. Already, I think I'd had enough characters coming over from the show and being adapted into live action fairly adequately, satisfyingly. Obviously, we had Skeletor and Evil Lyn there. We've then gone to He-Man, joined by what's obviously Man-at-Arms and Teela. I was perfectly happy with that. And then we meet Gwildor, who obviously is the stupid little bastard thing, but hopefully he doesn't come across in that way. Like the character he's kind of standing in for manages not to in the original cartoon, Orko. And Orko would have been the last character I'd have expected them to bring across into the live-action movie. He'd have been absolutely impractical to put on the screen in those days. And so I was quite satisfied with Gwildor as a kind of little character replacement. And he's quite interesting and quite well used in this movie, Gwildor, I think. I've always enjoyed the performance of Billy Barty, who was in his 60s while playing Gwildor in this movie. And if you look up the actors at the time of recording this commentary in fairly late 2018, find that they're all still alive, apart from Billy Barty, who died in 2000. But all the others, it seems, are still knocking around and basking in the glory of this movie, including John Cypher, Man-at-Arms, and wonderful James Tolkien, who plays Detective Lubick, who are, at the time of recording this commentary, in their late 80s. Which is something I always do after watching the film, try and catch up with the cast, see if they're still around, what they've been up to, if anything, recently. But yeah, that was another criticism I've read about this, or heard about this, of people's YouTube videos and so on. They wanted Orko at the time, and I suppose as a fan of the cartoon, you would want Orko, but as I say, it's an impracticality. And Gwildor and what they do with Gwildor and how he fits into the plot and themes, I think that works very well. I always like the way here Gwildor mentions Snake Mountain. He's talking about how Evil Lyn came round and nicked the Cosmic Key, the original, fully finished Cosmic Key, as Gwildor says, of course. Skeletor doesn't know Gwildor has this prototype key. That's why there are two keys. But yeah, Evil Lyn came round and nicked it, and Gwildor says, how could I know she was from Snake Mountain? She was beautiful. That would be Evil Lyn, says Man-at-Arms, and that's very much in keeping with the sorts of things that happen on the cartoon. Evil Lyn coming round, tricking people with her feminine wiles to get things for Skeletor. And Gwildor says Snake Mountain there, and he says it again later in the movie. Gwildor's the only character that actually uses the phrase Snake Mountain, expecting the viewers to know what Snake Mountain is to the baddies in the franchise. And of course, I did while watching this. How could I know she was from Snake Mountain? I know exactly what that means. How could I know she was a baddie? So it does rely, this movie, on the intelligence of its viewers and them being familiar with the franchise and being willing to adapt to this new version of the world for the movie. And, well, I think I did that successfully, and hopefully some other viewers did too. There's that rather obvious continuity error where Karg and the baddies break into Gwildor's house, and Karg says, "Find the key, tear this place apart." But no, Skeletor doesn't know about the prototype key yet, so Karg shouldn't be saying that. And that's reinforced later when Evil Lyn spots that the little worm has another key. "What?" says Skeletor. "Oh, but didn't you just send Karg round to get it?" Little errors like that, but you know, they're in far, quote-unquote, better films than this, such errors. So I'm certainly not chastising the film for that. And in this scene, with everyone in Grayskull, we get the whole main cast, Eternia cast, all coming together. And, as I say, I've always found them more than adequate as live-action versions, adaptations of the characters from the cartoon. The sorceress here, Christina Pickles, they don't go with the whole bird concept. She's got like ice crystals on her head instead. It works perfectly well. As I say, Man-at-Arms and Teela look the part and play the part pretty well. He-Man, Dolph Lundgren as He-Man. There is another thing about this film that people like to rip to shreds. Poor old Dolph Lundgren. He's always been a perfectly adequate live-action He-Man for me, and he always will. He looks the part very well indeed. And, okay, so his Eastern European acting style isn't as good or engaging or amusing as Arnold Schwarzenegger's, but as I say, he's perfectly adequate. I don't need anything better from live-action He-Man in this movie. He's got plenty of other cast members doing excellent performances to bolster him and back him up, and what he's doing is perfectly adequate to be the main character hero construct, which is really all he needs to be in this movie. Okay, we could have had a movie with He-Man having more to him, but, you know, without the inclusion of Prince Adam and the transformation sequence, what Dolph Lundgren does here is all He-Man needs to do and be and come across as, and I think he's absolutely fine. I don't go as far as to say good, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Good, on the other hand, is inadequate as a description for Frank Langella as Skeletor, because he's brilliant. In all these versions of He-Man I've been commentating on, I've given special praise to the actors playing Skeletor, Alan Oppenheimer, Brian Dobson, and here, Frank Langella. Frank Langella is definitely an actor who has been in and been acclaimed for better movies than this, better thought of movies than this, quite often. And it's really gratifying that he comes into this movie at the request of his young son, who really wanted to see him play Skeletor, which is quite a nice story, and gives it so much, puts so much into the part of Skeletor, makes so much of it, doesn't play it too tongue-in-cheek for laughs, but plays the part of the main villain really well, really immersively, and provides the standout performance of the movie. And that's okay that Skeletor is doing an absolutely brilliant performance in the movie, and He-Man is just kind of fulfilling the role of the main hero adequately, it works. If one of them wasn't a brilliant acting performance, perhaps the whole movie would suffer. But as one of them is, it works, and they work as the main goodie and the main baddie. And I'm not saying that Skeletor upstages He-Man in any way. He just adds more acting to the movie and performing to the movie than He-Man does. And let's face it, one of them needed to add that amount. Meg Foster as Evil Lynn is the other really good acting performance, I would think. Obviously, she gets cast in things with her strange eyes to make her look sinister or evil, and it really works for Evil Lynn. And she and Skeletor make rather a good double act in this movie, a different dynamic rather than they had in the cartoon. But, as I say, it works as a kind of extension of Skeletor from the cartoon and Skeletor and Evil Lynn and their interplay from the cartoon. I was perfectly satisfied, and I still am, with all that kind of thing, as a live-action version of it. You know, I knew coming in it was never going to be exactly the same, and as I've mentioned, I think, I didn't like things that were supposed to be the same franchise set in the same universe being all different from each other. But with this, well, I knew it had to be different, live-action He-Man, and, yeah, what they did with it, perfectly adequate, perfectly reasonable way to adapt the cartoon into live action. I was never quite sure who was supposed to have shot the grappler out of the portal to get the cosmic key here. The grappler is a sort of thing that the characters would habitually have on them in the cartoon. He-Man would pull one out of his harness, Man-at-Arms would have a grappler on him, even Teela could have. But it seems in this movie that the grappler is one of Gwildor's inventions. Gwildor has a lot of inventions. He's not just, as Evil Lynn calls him, the locksmith. He's a great inventor. As if the cosmic key wasn't proof enough of that. So was it Gwildor who shot the grappler to get the key? He seems to have charge of the grappler elsewhere in the movie. But then in this scene in the swamp when they land, Man-at-Arms is holding the grappler. And the key's shot out of it somewhere, as we know. Larwood Cemetery. Well, everyone knows that that's where it's at. So I was never quite sure who the grappler belonged to and who got the key, but it doesn't really matter. It progresses the film and the plot and does what it needs to do. This scene with the cow, I suppose it's meant to be funny, but it isn't really. But, you know, I thought it was gently not unamusing, Gwildor and his persistent attempts to communicate with the cow. I think Billy Barty plays it quite fun, quite quirky. Synchronise our personal locators, and there we get the introduction of Good Journey. And I like that, the way it's explained at the end of the film. Don't say goodbye, say good journey. And they're right, aren't they? Every destination in life is but a doorway to another. So Good Journey is quite an apt farewell. I always thought, what a shame they didn't say Good Journey in the cartoon. That would have been a nice link, but there we go. Nice enough as it is. And here we are with Courtney Cox at Robbie's Ribs. When I first saw Friends, I thought, there's Julie. And I said, there's Julie. And when I realised that Monica's mother on Friends was the sorceress, Christina Pickles, well, I was very pleased with that little snippet of information. I always wanted Monica's mother to say to her, Julie, keep this with you, and Eternia will always be near. But of course she never did, because it wouldn't have been very relevant on Friends. Interestingly enough, this friend of Julie's in the diner, who she works with, is called Monica. Wow, that could get very confusing, thinking about who's Monica and who isn't. But I've heard this whole sequence here being objected to. We've come to watch He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and here we are with Courtney Cox working in a fast food joint. Okay, it's not He-Man as we've seen it before. It's quite original, and I was quite sure that they were going to take it in the right direction. Julie and Kevin here were going to join up with the returning characters at some appropriate point, and of course they do. Some people don't like Julie and Kevin in this as protagonists. Oh, Earth kids, okay, that shouldn't be the protagonist in a Masters of the Universe movie. But I think they both do rather a good job with rather a difficult acting situation to be put in, joining forces with He-Man and friends, just out of the blue, and all this stuff about Julie moving away and her parents and stuff. It's a strange kind of character brief to have to play. And I think Courtney Cox and Robert Duncan McNeil do it rather endearingly and rather well, and I don't think you could have done it any better. And indeed, at times, both of them add a lot to the movie and are rather entertaining. Yes, you see, in this bit, Gwildor has the grappler. He uses it to steal the takeaway of the snogging couple. Kind of implies, I think, yeah, this is one of his inventions. He carries it round with him. He used it to retrieve the key when they were coming through the portal. See, Billy Barty has no chance of actually drinking that coffee with the face mask on. It goes all down the beard, but that's fine. That works. It's the sort of thing Orko might have done on the cartoon, poured coffee all over himself. Hopefully not too hot coffee. But this is quite interesting and quite memorable. The bit where it seems that, or it is implied that, they don't eat meat on Eternia. I wonder why they put the food on these little white sticks. Those are rib bones. And Teela and Gwildor are absolutely horrified by the idea that these are rib bones and this used to be an animal. But Man-at-Arms doesn't mind. He's a grizzled old soldier and he's been forced to eat meat in extreme survival situations before. As he says, never think when you're hungry, which is quite good advice. But people do find that a bit strange, and they're right to do so, that it's implied here that they don't eat meat on Eternia, because they eat plenty of meat in the cartoon. Roast Gooble. They'll eat meat at the palace quite happily. So, I don't know where they got that one from. What a barbaric world, says Teela. Quite harsh judgment there from Teela. So it's strange and incongruous, that. But memorable anyway. And here we're back to Julie and Kevin talking about Julie's dead parents, and I've heard this scene being heavily criticised as being boring and irrelevant to Masters of the Universe. This has nothing to do with Masters of the Universe. Well, today, in this movie, in this adaptation, to tell this particular story, which is nothing like we've had on the cartoon, it does have something to do with Masters of the Universe. I always noticed how they rigged up all these lampposts, which suddenly come on while they're walking away from the graves. And then when they actually find the cosmic key, they're obviously filming in the pitch darkness. And there's the whole story. You can hear it on the director's commentary and other places, how they were out of light on shooting this scene and they had to get it done that day. So they rigged up these lights and they tried to light this to make it look like it wasn't pitch dark, but it obviously was. But never mind, it doesn't matter. from a storytelling point of view. It's obvious what's supposed to be happening, where they're supposed to be, what sort of time of day it's supposed to be. When little bits of obvious production niggles and slight problems come through in the movie there and are noticeable, perhaps that's not ideal and the movie makers feel rather negative about it, but really, it doesn't matter. Nobody's perfect, and they certainly did the best there with what they had and what they could. The trouble with trying to recreate Skeletor with makeup, and it's a wonderful, brilliant makeup job, don't get me wrong, is it's never really going to look like a real skull. I mean, the eyeballs are the giveaway, aren't they? But they couldn't have done Skeletor any other way. And it is an excellent makeup job and very striking. But like Orko, I suppose, Skeletor just doesn't translate that well visually into live action. But fortunately, as I say, Frank Langella's brilliant performance makes Skeletor's inclusion here absolutely brilliant, absolutely vital part of the movie. Well, perhaps we can rest assured in the knowledge that the characters from Earth and the characters from Eternia are going to come together very soon, as we have Skeletor tracking the key, and Kevin keeps mucking about with the key. Japanese synthesizer, he thinks it is, at least at first. I mean, that's quite topically amusing, isn't it? It's like Back to the Future, all the best stuff is made in Japan. They have these technological advances that the Americans wish that they'd made. Quite funny, isn't it, when James Tolkien, Lubick, says, "You don't think this could be Russian, do you?" He's still worried about the Russians and their nuclear weapons and things like that, despite the fact that we're no longer really in the depths of the Cold War at this point. So I like little things like that, things that tie it into our world. I remember first watching this part and thinking, Evil-Lyn's introducing Skeletor's 4 finest warriors. Are any of them going to be from the show? It would be good if they were. And I was fairly satisfied to hear her say, the Beastman. Of course, Beastman in this isn't much like Beastman from the show. Beastman in this doesn't talk. He's got kind of samurai armour. He doesn't seem to be a kind of power over animals kind of beast man, but a sort of half beast, half man creature who's rather savage, which is rather different, but I suppose, again, a fair adaptation for the live action movie. And who else have we got there? Blade, with his double swords, and of course the actor who played Blade is called Anthony DeLongis, not exactly sure how that's spelled, said, was the swords master on the movie and helped Dolph Lundgren with all his choreography with the swords and staged the sword battles. So that's why he's playing Blade, he's the sword expert. So that's rather nice. And Blade is a character it would have made a lot of sense if he'd been on the cartoon, a kind of sword rival for He-Man. When he's going to take He-Man on with the swords in the junkyard bit, Blade says, "I've waited a long time for this." Have you? Well, we haven't seen it on the cartoon. So yeah, he wasn't in the cartoon, but he'd have made sense in there, he'd have fitted in there. And then we've got Karg again, of course, who we've seen earlier, and is quite prominent in the movie in the end. And the other one is Sorad, the kind of lizard man. And like Beastman, he doesn't talk. And again, that's reminiscent of the sort of characters we used to see on the show. There were a couple of different lizard men who were goodies. Skeletor had sort of reptilian underlings at times, not just the obvious one, Whiplash, but he had this kind of lizard man at one point in one episode called Fang Man. So, even though the characters apart from Beastman aren't really from the show, they are reminiscent of characters from the show and are quite satisfying, I think, for He-Man fans. I was able to accept them. Okay, a version of Beastman, 3 other characters that seem to fit quite well into the Masters of the Universe whole thing. Yeah, I was fine with that. Here's where Courtney Cox starts to earn her stripes as an 80s scream queen, invading all the bad guys. Of course, we've not seen much from He-Man recently. He may be the lead hero, but there's plenty of time when he's not on the screen in this movie, and, well, you don't miss it, do you? But as I say, when he is there, he's perfectly adequate. And he's about to meet Julie, of course. And you can hear director Gary Goddard say on his commentary how they didn't really know what they were going to do with the shots of He-Man running around with his scanner in the darkened streets. Well, I certainly wouldn't have guessed that they weren't deliberately here to indicate He-Man coming closer to meeting up with Julie. It all seemed very seamless, very deliberate, the whole thing to me. But obviously, I was wrong. Must have had fun doing that blade, mustn't he? Cutting through all that wire fence and pulling it back. And it makes quite a good scene, this, I think. Quite tense, searching around the junkyard. Ah, finally, she's run into He-Man. I always noticed how you got Dolph Lundgren's accent coming out there. Dodby Upgrade. But never mind. Nothing wrong with that. What was it? Dolph had in his contract that he would be allowed 3 goes to re-record the dialogue so that they were happy with it before they got someone in to redub him, like they used to do sometimes if they thought the actors didn't sound right talking, even if they looked right playing the part. And Dolph managed to do a version that they were all happy with on his 3rd attempt. Poor old Dolph. Really, you can't hope to find a better He-Man, certainly not a better looking He-Man. And, you know, if they got another actor in to redo his lines, I think that would have been completely unnecessary. He does absolutely fine. It's another thing that people find disappointing, I think, the fact that there is no Prince Adam. It's not really alluded to, the double identity. I mean, I was always fine with that. I thought, well, that's a very obvious decision. It's something they thought it'd be best to do for this live-action movie. It works for this one continuous adventure. I mean, I suppose it's a little disappointing. It's an iconic part of the series, the transformation. But I was satisfied enough with the allusions they make to it later in the movie, with the inclusion of I have the power. That was more than enough for me. So you can make a different live-action He-Man movie with Prince Adam as a character and He-Man as a more rounded character version of Prince Adam. But, you know, for this movie, you don't need that. It's fine without it. I've absolutely no problem with it. You'll notice that as well as He-Man and the native girl winning this fight, Man-at-Arms and Teela do turn up and force the bad guys into a retreat. So when Evil Lynn is criticising them for being outclassed by He-Man and the native girl, she's being rather unfair to the guys there. They were outclassed by He-Man, the native girl, and coming to help at the end, Man-at-Arms and Teela. Here we are, back to some stuff that has nothing to do with Masters of the Universe. Charlie's Music Store. You know eventually that some characters from Eternia are going to catch up with this cosmic key. It's always being taken out of the building just before they turn up looking for it. Kevin took it out of the high school, and then the next time they think they're going to find it, Detective Lubick has nicked it off Kevin. Well, confiscated it, I suppose. That cosmic key melody, I agree with Kevin. It is quite a charming little jingle, and I always liked it. And it always gives me happy memories of being young and watching this and engaging with this. I think I understood even when I was 7 that Charlie had this police scanner illegally tapped into the police communication system. I mean, it's quite an effective way to move the plot along, isn't it? Kevin finds out about arson at the high school. Oh my god, Julie's in there. Of course, we know what's happened since then. But Kevin doesn't. And yes, here we go. We come back to He-Man and Julie and our only hope of defeating Skeletor. Julie has no trouble believing all this. And she's quite right to believe it. I suppose having had the cosmic key, which was obviously a bit weird and otherworldly, adds credence there to He-Man's story. Kevin has it. He's in terrible danger. Let's go. I mean, do you really believe Dolph when he says that? Well, I certainly do. And the film is rather spiced up here by the introduction of James Tolkan as Detective Lubick. Very recognisable as Mr. Strickland from the Back to the Future movies. Of course, I suppose he would have made this between making Back to the Future movies, after Back to the Future, and before filming Back to the Future 2 and 3. And he really is very entertaining, isn't he? With his amusingly aggressive way of doing everything and saying everything. He adds a lot to the movie. It always struck me how Kevin suddenly knows his name later in the movie and starts calling him Lubick. We've never heard him say it or anyone call him it, but I suppose he has told Kevin his name in the car when we weren't there. Yep, all excellent stuff there from James Tolkan. We're going to go look for your girlfriend. Try her house first. I bet you know where that is. Is Teela slightly jealous here? She'd like He-Man to wrap her up in his cloak and put his arm around her. Did you have any luck? Not as much as you, apparently. I mean, that's gentle and innocuous, isn't it? This apparently is a bit that makes some people cringe. Gwildor and his converted pink car. Is it a pink Cadillac? I'm not sure. Something along those lines. That's fine with me. And as Gwildor explains here, a primitive internal combustion engine that he was very scornful of, and he's converted it to neutrinos, and it will run efficiently and greenly now. Gwildor is desperately needed to help with the future of the transportation industry on our planet. Shame he didn't stick around and do so. Here's this scene between Skeletor and Evil Lyn before the guys get back, which is quite sexual, certainly sensual. She kneels in front of him and he's clawing her shoulders and looking into her eyes and stuff. I have read that there were plans to make the interplay between Skeletor and Evil Lyn even more kind of sexual in this film, and they didn't overdo it in the end, which I think was a good idea, because that would be deviating a bit too far from the cartoon. But it is quite intriguing, the relationship between those two in the cartoon and in this. Evil Lyn always claims she has no loyalty to Skeletor. One day she'll turn against him, seize power for herself, but I always get the feeling she is kind of rather fond of him, as well as being kind of in awe of him. I think she's more emotionally attached to him than she would like to admit even to herself, and perhaps Skeletor indeed feels the same way about Evil Lyn. So I think it was certainly interesting to include that little fairly sexual undertones exchange between them there. And here we have the only actual death in the movie. Of course, I'm not counting all the troops, black armoured troops that die as actual deaths. Well, of course, they're only robots, aren't they? I think so. And it's the death of Saurard, who, of course, we've only just met. Rather tough on him, really. Skeletor picks him out to incinerate after the initial failure to get the key, failure of everybody. But he's really the most expendable of those four characters. Cog and Blade talk, so they're useful to have around, so they can do dialogue with other characters. Beastman, you can't kill off some version of Beastman, no matter what Masters of the Universe you're making. So, yeah, it had to be Saurard, really, didn't it? And again, that's interesting between Skeletor and Evil Lyn there. She's kind of starting to rebel against him, at least in her own mind. I was not suggesting that I go, then you should not have spoken. And the way she's looking back at him, excellent face acting and body work from Meg Foster, she obviously really resents being put in this position by Skeletor. She's starting to think, perhaps her loyalty to Skeletor isn't going to last the entire movie. And as you notice, after 2 or 3 watch-throughs, it really actually doesn't. Yes, here's the bit where the goodies and the baddies are chasing the cosmic key all over the town. And it really depends on who needs to get there to where the key is or was first for the plot, on who actually gets there first, rather than how much time they've been spending flying there or driving there. So if you kind of plot the journeys of the characters chasing the key, they don't actually make sense on a time scale here, but they play out as they need to, as I say, for the plot. So there we are. Can't object to that. Like Kevin and Charlie before him, Detective Lubick is quite certain quite quickly, I don't think this is any synthesizer, but it might be a Russian nuclear weapon, of course. And here's this bit I was referencing. This is where they ambushed us. We didn't have a chance. And Evil Lynn says, we'll see, scanner. And she gets given this scanner that shows what happened here in this place in the past. And one thing people do object to, another thing about this film, this is one I've definitely read, is Evil Lynn doesn't use enough magic. Here's this bit I was also talking about, outclassed by He-Man and the native girl. As I say, a bit harsh. But yeah, Evil Lynn in the cartoon, the witch, she's always using magic of some sort. And in this, she doesn't really do it, except in one very significant scene, which I'll talk about when we get to it. And I suppose in many ways that is rather disappointing. They've really bigged up the sci-fi elements of the franchise with this movie, rather than the fantasy stuff. But of course the fantasy stuff is in there too. But I think fans find it disappointing. Evil Lynn wants to look into the past. She uses this scanner rather than her magic powers. There's the bit coming up very, very soon where she says to Kevin, have you seen this object? And to create the image of the cosmic key for has he seen it? It's this kind of hologram projector, handheld hologram projector that she has, rather than some sort of magic image that she makes with her magic. Opportunities like that for Evil Lynn to be like Evil Lynn on the cartoon and use magic, I suppose that is rather disappointing and would have made links to the cartoon that it doesn't make and would have been rather nice. But the bit of Evil Lynn magic that is used, I do like and I think is rather effective. And I'll be sure to point it out when we get there. Again, as I say, the cosmic key has been tracked just like it was at the high school, and the baddies are going to come and tear the place apart. But this time, here we go. Strickland, Detective Lubick, takes it away. And with his mind slightly more at ease about Julie, Kevin decides to do some clearing up. You see, the baddies have only just traced the key, and they're first at the house, but it was ages ago that Julie was on the phone to Kevin and saying we'll be right there. And the pink car takes ages to turn up. Whereas later, the goodies will make it to Charlie's music store before the baddies. The Eternians have already arrived when they've really had less time to do it. So as I say, it doesn't really make sense, but it doesn't really matter either. Of course, this collar that makes you tell the truth is technology rather than magic, where magic could be used. You'd never be able to do that now, would you? Even a sword expert actually stabbed the dagger into the table beside the head of another actor. It'd be an insurance nightmare. But Anthony did it, and he didn't kill Robert Duncan McNeill, so there we go, everything was fine. Yes, you have to remember here that Cog has found the newspaper article and photos of Julie and her parents, because that will become very significant. Have you seen this object? A hologram projector Evil Lynn is using. That's not the sort of thing Evil Lynn should be using. Of course, the trouble is with this collar that makes you tell the truth, it doesn't make Kevin reveal where Lubick said he might take the cosmic key down to Charlie's to verify Kevin's story. And the good guys get Kevin to confess that to them, not with the collar on, but just by kind of badgering him about it. So the collar didn't make Kevin tell the whole truth there, did it? I don't know, he just left. Maybe if Evil Lynn had said, now come on, think, didn't he give you any clues? Collar would have made Kevin say he's going to Charlie's music store. So that's a bit of a problem. Collar's supposed to force the truth out of you, but it doesn't, but then just general badgering does in the next scene. Yep, it certainly took you long enough to get there, didn't it? But here we are at Julie's house. It's quite effective the way Teela says here, I think. Evil Lynn, she's here based on what Kevin's told her. A woman, strange eyes. I mean, that's significant. Evil Lynn's here. Things are about to get real. And Kevin, Robert Duncan McNeil, does a good job here when the collar comes off with his reactions. Obviously, he's rather scared and discombobulated. He's trying to explain to Julie, I swear to God, these things came in here and started to beat the crap out of me. I mean, you would be surprised and alarmed by that. Perhaps it's the most grounded in reality reaction to what's going on in this movie of the whole movie, so excellent work from Kevin there. When my mum would be around and this would be on the telly, she used to say, well, the people in this town aren't very observant, are they? All this intergalactic battles going on in the darkened streets in the evening, none of them seem to notice what's going on. And yes, indeed, it's true, they don't. There we go, there's the bit. Kevin kind of tells them to shut them up. He said he was going down to Charlie's music store. And now Kevin's part of the gang. Reluctantly at first, but not for long. Yes, I mean, I suppose the baddies have been trying to track the key. They didn't know exactly where they were going, but the goodies have Kevin to directly show them the way to Charlie's, and here they are already, very next scene. So as I say, yeah, the timings don't make a lot of sense, but never mind. Yes, amusingly aggressive, that's how Lubick is here with He-Man. He's gonna get some answers. Let's start with you, Blondie. I mean, that's good stuff. He thinks there's some sort of cult. I mean, that's quite a realistic reaction, I suppose. They are rather outlandish from the perspective of the people on Earth who notice that they're actually there. I suppose Charlie's doing some quite good reacting in the background as well. He's surprised, has no idea what's going on. Of course, you know Gwildor's never going to figure out how to get home yet. There's plenty more of the movie to come first. Yes, Evil Lynn's quite surprised here. The Eternians have already arrived. Well, how on earth have they managed that? Well, somehow they have. It's nearly time for the bits with Evil Lynn's magic that I was promising. And it is good use of Evil Lynn as a witch character, and it's the sort of thing she might have done, would have done, on the cartoon show. And I think it's fair to say that some fans have admitted that Evil Lynn pretending to be Julie's mom is an okay bit, a bit they quite like, a bit that reminds them of the cartoon. Just like Evil Lynn would go round to Gwildor to pretend to be interested in his work and nick his cosmic key. She also, quite frequently on the cartoon, magically changes her form to trick people. That's what she does to Julie here. And if you were just coming in blind to this movie and you didn't really know the cartoon series, you might not really get how Evil Lynn is able to do that, change herself into Julie's mom. Because really there's no other evidence of her as a witch in this movie. So again, like the inclusion of casual references to Snake Mountain, it relies on the viewer knowing Masters of the Universe and wanting to see some homage to the cartoon in the movie. And again, when I watched it, I was 7. It worked on me. And it might take you a couple of watches of the movie to realise, yes, okay, they've got the information and Evil Lynn knows what Julie's mom looks like from the newspaper article. Okay, well that certainly makes sense in the context of this movie. Of course, we have to have quite a forced situation here in the back room for Julie to be able to get her hands on the key, because Gwildor has to put it down, and he only puts it down because everyone else is fighting over the gun. But there we go, it works for the movie. I mean, Gwildor should really be spending the time working on the cosmic key rather than firing warning shots and telling everyone to be quiet because he has a lot of serious work to do. But here we go, Evil Lynn as Julie's mom. I wonder if we might have got an inkling, as established He-Man fans watching this, that this was Evil Lynn in disguise. I can't remember whether I did or not, but probably if pressed I'd have said that that was what was going on, because it obviously wasn't really going to be Julie's mom. It's obviously a trick to get the key, and thinking about the cartoon, oh yeah, it's probably Evil Lynn in disguise, and satisfyingly for cartoon fans, that's exactly what it is. Reminds me of the first evil from Buffy, this. We trust the ones we love not to lie to us. And that's what Evil Lynn's banking on. She understands that if there's anyone Julie will nick the cosmic key for, it would be her mother. She very wisely decided not to turn into the dad. But perhaps this version of Evil Lynn has issues with her dad and assumes Julie does too. We know that the 2002 cartoon version of Evil Lynn has issues with her dad, the faceless one. So why not in this continuity as well? Where's Julie? She's going to get tricked by Evil Lynn and now she's going to nick the cosmic key. But this is rather effective, a genuinely good bit of the movie. Evil Lynn going, "Thank you, my darling." And the echo there, and oh, it was Evil Lynn. Good stuff. And yeah, that's Evil Lynn from the cartoon, even if other bits of Evil Lynn aren't. So yeah, that bit definitely a highlight of the movie in many ways. I don't think they get away with this now, either, having the actors jump over this fire. Particularly Billy Barty, who is obviously rather shorter than the rest of them and up to 40 years older than the rest of them. Surprised he made it over at all, really. Charlie's Music Store, just like the high school gym and Julie's house before it, has been totally trashed. Are there any intact keyboards left? Well, I think there must be at least one, as we'll find out later on. I think that car explosion is the explosion that accidentally blew out all the shop windows on the street during the night shoot here. I mean, James Tolkien's awfully good in response to that, isn't he? I think I'm going to need some backup. Yeah, you probably will. But what did Cannon Films do about blowing out all the shop windows? They arranged for them all to be boarded up by the morning. Not the glass to be replaced, just for the windows to be boarded up. There's an argument for why it's better to be able nowadays to use CG for big explosions rather than actually doing it on the screen. That's not going to blow out shop windows. But still, as I always say, CG has less heart, even if it is less dangerous. And here we go, Skeletor on Earth, which I found quite satisfying when I was young, first watching this. You can read on the movie database that shot of the shop window with the reflection of the word drugs or drugstore in it is a goof. It's obviously a flipped shot because the writing is backwards, but I always thought it was a reflection of the shop on the opposite side of the street in a shop window that we're looking at, and that's why it was backwards. So I don't think it's necessarily a goof. This is the bit that really shows that the local residents are very unobservant. Skeletor and his giant flying chariot sort of thing. No one notices this going on. Certainly they don't react to it in any way. Yes, and here Skeletor and Evil Lynn seem to be contacting each other, sort of by telepathy, but it seems to be activated by pressing buttons on the arms of their vehicles. So again, it's more technology than magic. So I think fans of the cartoon find that kind of thing slightly disappointing. And yes, I can quite understand why they do so. Air Centurions, again, they're not actually something from the cartoon specifically, but they seem to me like the kind of things that Skeletor might have had and might have used. And again, I suppose they're robots because He-Man can blow them up. So I wasn't counting them in my death toll of 1. But yeah, they're a bit like, I suppose, hover robots, that sort of thing that Skeletor would have used before. They evoke the sense of the cartoon show, even if they're not directly adapted from it. You know, could you get a better, more heroic, more convincing shot of He-Man bursting through a window with that look on his face than the one Dolph Lundgren did? I don't think so. I think it's very unfair to say he's an inadequate He-Man because he isn't. Of course, He-Man uses the grappler to get the key here, but we know he said he's got it from Gwildor. Grappler, give it to me, Gwildor. So, yeah, I think it is Gwildor's grappler, really, after many decades of careful thought about the matter. That's the conclusion I've come to. I think I was getting moderately excited when I first watched this. All this He-Man flying around, Skeletor is here, things are obviously about to come to a head. We're building up to what exciting conclusion we're going to get. And as I say, it more than satisfied me as a live-action adaptation of He-Man when I was 7, and every year that I watched it since then, and it still does now. Here comes the bit where Gwildor says Snake Mountain again, just casually in conversation, assuming we'll all know what he means, where he means, the connotations of Snake Mountain as the bastion of evil. And we do, if we're real masters of the universes. I would never knowingly serve the Lord of Snake Mountain. I used to think there maybe finally someone was going to refer to Skeletor on the screen as the Lord of Destruction, but no, it never happens. The Lord of Snake Mountain. I've noticed that Teela does have her Masonic Kasserat on her here. It would be very easy to look back and say, well, where did she get that? And Man-at-Arms get his Octo Direct Fire. They don't have those on them at all times, but they do for this night shoot, just to make sure we can't look back and say it doesn't make any sense. Yes, Skeletor is frequently referred to as the Lord of Destruction on things like the action figure packaging and the mini comic, if you find pictures of that online. And in things like colouring books and annuals, Skeletor, Lord of Destruction. But it's not a phrase that really makes it into the show. Very much like the phrase Masters of the Universe, really. They don't do anything with it as a phrase. All these crack troops, black armoured robots of Skeletors aren't much like the cartoon, anything from the cartoon. I suppose the thing they're most like is Horde Troopers, really, from She-Ra. And I've heard people object to them as an aspect of the movie. And all the laser gun stuff, He-Man fighting with laser guns, we don't want to see that. Skeletor having all these random black-clad slave robot things, we don't want to see that. Reminds me of the Ladybird books, where Skeletor has slaves called Skelcons, but they're humanoid creatures, really, rather than robots. But it's not a new concept, Skeletor having kind of armies of slaves at his command, even if having a kind of army of troops at his command is new for this movie. So yeah, all these things do remind me of other parts of the Masters of the Universe franchise, even if they're not exactly the same or exact adaptations. And yeah, all that helped to make me think while watching this, yeah, it's He-Man in live action. I can see where they're coming from. I can see where they've got it all from. I don't have a problem with it. And indeed, I don't have a problem with it. Blade obviously understands the significance of the sword there. Look what I've got my hands on, hooray. Surrender your sword. And Skeletor puts a lot of significance, once they're back in Grayskull, into saying, the Sword of Grayskull. Mine! Now and forever. I mean, if we weren't cartoon fans, we'd think, well, why does that really matter? What's so special about that sword? Oh, it's the Sword of Grayskull, is it? I thought it was He-Man's sword. It's a very special, very magic sword, is it? Well, I didn't get that from the movie so far. And indeed you wouldn't get that from the movie so far. But again, that's something for fans of the cartoon. We know the significance of He-Man's sword. Why Blade makes that face when he picks it up. Why Skeletor crows about the Sword of Grayskull. Mine, now and forever. Of course, he's quite wrong about that. An important tip for watching this movie is never watch this bit with Julie's injury while having your supper or any other meal. It's quite revolting, all that green muck. Only our sorcerers can heal her now. Now that's her mom, rather than Evil Lyn in actuality. So even if you didn't think they were ever going to get back to Eternia, for that bit of ticking clock peril for Julie, you can be pretty sure they're going to get back now. And Kevin does this scene rather well, doesn't he? Desperation. There has to be a way, isn't there? Wildor. And Billy Barty does this bit awfully well too. Explaining to Kevin as gently as he can what's wrong, why they can't get back. But of course that sparks Kevin off into saying, well, I know the tones. Can we get back then? Yes, we can. Of course, with these close-ups on Gwildor, you can see Billy's blacked out lips through the mouth of the mask. At least you can on quite large screen television on DVD. You didn't used to be able to spot it on the video. But Billy Bertie is about to deliver what might be the best line of the movie, and the most thought-provoking one. Certainly always struck me. I mean, I don't know why Kevin does get so down on himself here. He's so desperate to save Julie. He knows the tones. Why does he suddenly start saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter anyway? You got the wrong song maker, Gwildor. I'm just a stupid keyboard player in a high school band. There's a million of me. And again, this is very reminiscent of the cartoon, the kind of values, thoughts they'd be trying to teach you on the cartoon. Gwildor points out, very well delivered. Only one of you, Kevin. Only one of anybody. And isn't Gwildor right about that? And indeed, with a lot of people, one is more than enough. But yeah, that's just the sort of thing the cartoon would try to remind us of. Don't ever think there's a million of you. There's only one of you. There's only one of everyone. And you should value yourself as an individual. But there we go, Teela's had enough of all this philosophizing. Kevin knows the tones. Can you get us home or can't you? Yes, but I need a few things. Now these apparently are things that Eternans just carry around with them every day. As I mentioned, what they are, the Sonic Tesseract from Teela. Man at Arms has an Octoda Rectifier, of course. I mean, who doesn't carry an Octoda Rectifier around with them? Well, people from Eternia do habitually, obviously. It's like if Gwildor had said to people from Earth, I need a couple of things, a pen, and a keyring. And spare a thought there for Richard Sponder, the kid who won the competition to come to the set of the Masters of the Universe movie, stand there in a mask that completely covered his face, and hand Skeletor his Havoc staff. What a prize that was. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, to have the opportunity to invite 10 of his classmates to the premiere in the cinema, and then have them all come out afterwards and say, well, where the hell were you, Richard? You weren't in that movie at all. And he had to say, yes, I was. I played Pig Boy. And they said, Pig Boy? What are you on about? But yeah, he is there. And once you know, you can spot him. Again, that's a cock-up of timing and circumstance on the film. I like the way Frank Langella delivers this, as I say, the sword of Grayskull, mine, now and forever. And the significance of that is not lost on the audience. Certainly, the cartoon-loving audience. Yes, of course, they were done with all their Earth filming by the time little Richard Sponder was brought to the set to be in the movie, so they couldn't do what would have been the obviously correct thing to do, include him in the Earth part. He could have been an extra there, although of course his character should have been in bed, but they could have done something with it. But no, he had to be an extra on Eternia. So what do? They completely obscure his identity and have him pass the staff to Skeletor. Poor little thing. People say this whipping scene is rather homoerotic. I suppose I can see what they mean. Skeletor does seem to be deriving some sort of perverse pleasure from it. Yep, apparently Kevin has gone to get the keyboard from Charlie's, which has been completely destroyed. It must be the last remaining working keyboard from the store. But there we go. He only needed one, and here it is. I always thought it was rather fun that the makeshift portal that Gwildor conjures up here, pulled through a load of stuff from Earth as well as the people. What was left behind in its place, I wonder? Just a sort of hole. And I always rather liked how half the car comes through, and bits of the wall, and bits of the fountain. And yes, you can hear people criticising this part by saying, well, the set that they've built in the Castle Grayskull set, with the stuff that's come through from Earth, doesn't correspond at all with the positions of the car, the fountain, the bench, whatever, the phone in this shot. But never mind, you don't notice that when you watch it the first time, and from a storytelling point of view, it doesn't matter that it all doesn't match up. Gwildor's become a firm Kevin and Julie shipper by that point, it seems. Just get on with fixing up the key, Gwildor. The other bit of continuity that is noticeably erroneous is where Skeletor has assembled Blade, Sorad, Beastman, and Cog to talk to, instruct, and they keep swapping positions in the lineup, which is a bit strange. You think they could have been more careful about that during filming, but never mind. I didn't notice that until I read it on Movie Database, so there we are. It doesn't matter. Frank Langella put so much into all this stuff that Skeletor has to say here. As you die, so will I be reborn and things, and he continues to do so with all the I, Skeletor, am master of the universe. He does a great job. Could have come across as rather silly and over the top, but he's excellent. Again, a glimpse of Eternia here, and it's all matte painting. It's quite sort of desolate, broken machinery hanging around, presumably in the aftermath of Skeletor's military takeover. It's teasing glimpses we get of the world of Eternia in the movie, due to budgetary constraints, yes, but, I thought it was all artistic decision. And I think it works. And all this stuff that Skeletor has to say during the opening of the Great Eye of the Universe, when he absorbs the power of the universe, could come across as a bit much, but Frank Langella does it so well. And it's striking and memorable. And this doesn't really have any sort of precedent from any cartoon or source material so far. The Great Eye opens on the universe, and you can absorb the power of the universe. I mean, that's not really what the power of Grayskull involved in the past, but for this movie, it works fine. Frank Langella put so much into everything. Are you ready to kneel now, proud warrior? It just makes so much of the lines and the part, and great stuff. I remember I was watching this at one point, and some adult, I don't think it was my mum, came into the room and said, "Oh, that's supposed to be Skeletor. It doesn't look anything like Skeletor." And then, of course, you have to explain, don't you? Well, actually, Skeletor's standard costume in this movie does look like you would expect Skeletor in live action to look. But that is Master of the Universe Skeletor with extra power, and that's why he has all different gold costume and a funny headdress. I mean, did I get this adult, whoever it might be, to understand that concept? I doubt it. It's more than a young Masters of the Universe fan is probably capable of, I would think. And again, I like the way they incorporate the phrase Master of the Universe into Skeletor's dialogue there, again making links back to the title. And there we are. Half the car, the edge of the fountain, phone box. Doesn't match up with their positions from before, but I always thought it was rather fun, a rather good entry for the rest of the goodies. Good stuff. And I think I knew at this point. Well, first watching this, right, we're down to the climactic end of the movie. He-Man leaps into action at last. And I was pleasantly surprised by the inclusion of some cartoon homage towards the end here. I was certainly satisfied with it as a conclusion. You can see from those shots of Evil Lynn that she's starting to rather doubt that Skeletor is going to keep control of the situation here. She and Beastman and Cog are about to abandon Skeletor. And presumably Blade goes with them as well, actually. And they could have come back, couldn't they, for a sequel, if it was going to be a sequel. But obviously, with the lack of commercial success of this movie, that was never going to happen in the end. But yeah, you could have brought back all the baddies in a different situation. And here's the bit where He-Man pushes over the statue. And we're like, aha! This reminds me of the cartoon, He-Man and his super strength. We haven't seen much of that in the movie. The background music really builds up to it. It's quite effective. But does it really do anything? Do any good pushing over the statue? Not really. It sort of scares away those three troops. But it seems to have convinced Evil Lynn that it's the time to retreat, doesn't it? She and Cog and Beastman will go off together. And we don't see Blade, but I expect he's gone with them. But here we go. Here comes the real homage to the cartoon. He-Man pulls out the sword. What does he say? I have the power. I mean, we don't have the transformation sequence or by the power of Grayskull, but we have I have the power. We have the blue lightning coursing through his body there. I found that very, very satisfying. And more than enough He-Man homage in live action. More than I thought I had a right to expect. Let this be our final battle. Perhaps that's the most famous quotable line from this. It's certainly been in South Park a couple of times, but I'm sure it's been elsewhere. Now, I didn't realise that this fight sequence here was filmed several weeks later after the budget had completely run out. I thought the lights had gone down and they had this weird coloured backlighting effect because that was artistically what the director wanted to do. Whereas the truth is, it's all they can afford to do because they can't afford to light the whole studio. They filmed the end of the movie, but they didn't film a climactic scene with He-Man and Skeletor, and they didn't know exactly what He-Man's victory was going to have involved. Then several weeks later, Dolph Lundgren and Frank Langella, director Gary Goddard, and a couple of cameramen came back and filmed this. But they put a lot into it, didn't they? Yes. For you. And Skeletor pulls out the sword, which is rather like He-Man's sword to look at. And that's a bit of homage to some of the old source material, where He-Man has one half of the power sword and Skeletor has the other. And you can see they've done that with the action figures, and He-Man and Skeletor's swords with the action figures will actually clip together. Little bits of homage to the cartoon and the source material. And they're nice to include, and they do work. And I thought this was a pretty seamless cut. I never realised the actors here going, he did it! He-Man, victory, hooray! And He-Man's like, whew, victory. I didn't realise none of them knew at that point what the victory had involved. But apparently they didn't. This has been called rather misogynistic. Lubick gets to stay on Eternia and he's got this kind of sex slave woman, some kind of retirement, huh? Well, I guess he's earned it. Here's this bit I always wanted them to recreate in Friends. Christina Pickles and Courtney Cox. She gives Julie the memento of Eternia, but Kevin seems to have it when they're back on Earth. That always struck me as not making a lot of sense, but never mind. This bit always reminded me of The Wizard of Oz. Painful, extended goodbye sequence. But as I was saying earlier, I like the good journey stuff. So it's okay. I've also come across criticism saying, well, is Wildor really aware of Julie and Kevin's history and what's happened with Julie's parents? And does he know what Julie's asking him? Should he really realise Wildor, wait, send us back to when? Or has he already decided to do it? It doesn't make a lot of sense. But then, who cares? And of course, it threatens us here, doesn't it, with the old, it was all a dream ending. And I was very glad when they subverted that, actually, in the end. Oh, here we go. Julie wakes up in bed. No, I thought, surely they're not going to do this. But no, don't worry, they're not. They're just opening up a can of worms about should Julie really be here back in time saving her parents, and doesn't that mean they're going to have to go through the whole thing again in the future? Cosmic Key's going to turn up. Maybe this time they'll just leave it in the flower bed. And there's Mom, and it really is her this time. She did a good performance, actually, the Mom actress, as Evil Lynn. Some nice face work. She's obviously a different character, a different person here when she's playing real Mom. So again, yeah, all the actors managed to add something to the movie, and for what it is, it comes together rather well, I think. Now have a look carefully here. Isn't Kevin the one who's got the globe? Yeah, he raises it into shot. It's definitely in his hands. But for a final shot, I always like this. We come into the globe. Eternia will always be near. We see Grayskull and the image of He-Man standing in front of it with the sword aloft, and we get, once again, I have the power. And that's the end. I mean, I think that's a very effective way to sign off. So there it is. Masters of the Universe movie. Something, as I say, that I'll always be extremely fond of and keep watching. And I think people are rather harsh on it, even though, in many ways, it's not what it could be. But it should be appreciated, I think, for what it is. I was saying how you could have brought back the baddies in a different situation for the sequel, including Skeletor, and it took me until I got the DVD to be able to watch the after the credits sequence when Skeletor in the water saying, "I'll be back." Because on the video we had, my mum actually recorded a Man from U.N.C.L.E. film after this on the tape, and she started it recording immediately. The cast was finished on the closing credits of this. So there we go, quite a bit was missing there from my video version, so I'm glad to be able to come in at the end here with Skeletor and I'll be back. But unfortunately, he wasn't back, or at least not in live action movie form. So there we are, that concludes my commentary on Masters of the Universe 1987, and in a wider sense, my commentaries on the Masters of the Universe franchise. So, thank you for listening. Hopefully you'll always enjoy Masters of the Universe as much as I do. I've been Jake Collins. Goodbye.